Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jermillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted and influenced the people in my network, a growing network. So I'm picking these great leads to walk me through the books that have impacted them. And I want to know about the books that have influenced the work that they do, the lives that they build, the work that and businesses that they build. So in this particular series, I cover three categories of books that they're sharing with me that I haven't read, books that we've both read, whether specifically for the series or in a past life. The third category is when I'm lucky enough to sit down with the publishers and or authors of the books that we're covering, just to kind of get their perspective and give a voice and a tone to the message that they're trying to share with their audience, with this audience. So my guest today is Joe Weston. And Joe is an international thought leader, facilitator, author, lecturer, consultant, coach, professor, and above all else, an advocate for lasting peace. With a career spanning 30 plus years in the fields of conflict prevention, leadership, stress management, and communications, he is highly sought after facilitator for individuals as well as corporations, government agencies, and nonprofits around the world. As founder and owner of the Weston Network based in Washington, D.C., Joe and his international team provide training, consulting, and coaching based on his methodology called Respectful Confrontation. Through a network of 30 plus certified facilitators and even more allies and collaborators in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East, people from all walks of life have greatly benefited from Joe's highly effective methodology, from corporate innovators and entrepreneurs, government agencies, INGOs, educators, healthcare workers, parents, and young adults. Joe has served as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Department of Government Program of Conflict Resolution. In 2020, Joe founded the Fierce Civility Project, a nonprofit that further carries out the Weston Network's programs and messages across all sectors by helping others reclaim and reframe the concept of civility for the 21st century, activate deeper levels of civic engagement and respectful civil discourse, and break the gridlock caused by extreme polarization, resulting in a renewed sense of self in these unique and challenging times. Joe is also a prolific writer and the author of two groundbreaking books, Mastering Respectful Confrontation, A Guide to Personal Freedom and Empowered Collaborative Engagement. And the second book is Fierce Civility, Transforming Our Global Culture from Polarization to Lasting Peace. His popular advice column, Ask Joe, in the US-based online magazine, The Fulcrum, reaches more than 1 million readers per month. And I was lucky enough to be introduced to Joe by transformation coach and expert Corinne Coppola, who I interviewed in episode 69 of this series, where we covered The Gift, 12 Lessons to Save Your Life by Dr. Edith Eger. Please go check out that episode when you're done checking out this episode. I'm grateful to Corinne for having introduced me to Joe. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's great to be here. Thanks to Corinne for doing that. And thanks for reading my whole bio. You kind of exhausted me. That's and you probably exhausted yourself saying all that.
Listen, and here's the thing: you sent me the bios, and I wrote back. I'm like, Joe, I gotta chop this down to like 7 to 10 sentences. And you were like, yeah, do whatever you need.
Yeah.
And it was long, but it's like, okay, I gotta mention this. I gotta mention this. I can't cut out this. I gotta mention that, which I don't mind. But it's amazing to just hear about the work, read about the work that you've done, the reach that you've had across the world, that you do have these certified facilitators in the methodology. And as I mentioned before we started recording, it's just great to have you on now. Just this period in time that we're going through, the last decade in the US, just the chaos, the polarization that's taken place, and now everything amped up in whether it's Russia and Ukraine or Palestine and Israel. I just think it's a very, timely conversation to have about conversation, about conflict, and how we communicate with each other.
Yeah, let's do it. I think that's, it's a lot. Yes, there's a lot. And my whole thing is, with all of my experiences, is that my daily practice and commitment is to hold on to hope, and that I call fierce hope. We could talk about that, but I think that that's really important at this time in the midst of all this. Yeah.
Don't let me forget to jump into that, because I'm curious. On the flip side, in terms of bringing parties together, just that hope that you need. So that's just a great word. and concept that I think we take for granted, but it's a great tool if we know like what to look for, if we know how to talk about it. But we will get to that, I promise. Joe, first of all, I read a bio, but could you dive in a little more into the work that you do with your clients to give us a fuller picture of who you are today?
Well, my work has taken on an evolution in a sense, and that's kind of my life philosophy. Is from some of my background, which was in theater, and the basic principle of improv is say yes to whatever is presented to you, and I think that's where hope resides as well. Is to I always say to people, I say yes until I say no, and I've had some amazing opportunities that have been presented that I said yes to, not knowing where they were going to lead me, and they literally led me around the world in various places. But I have been doing communication trainings, particularly around dealing with aggression, since the early 90s. When I was living in the Netherlands, KLM, the Dutch airline, they started tracking that customers and passengers were getting more aggressive. Can you imagine? That was the early 90s, and needed to do some trainings. And I came in to help with that. And my work is always around interaction, the body. It's what I call skills-based learning. That there are so many trainings and there are so many books that people read. Books are fabulous to gather data, but gathering data is not necessarily learning something. And that I say what's unfortunate about the planet is filled with an enormous amount of information gatherers who haven't learned very much. That having the information is a first step. Contemplating it, taking it into your heart, getting a deeper understanding of it and knowledge of it, or build relationship with that information, takes you deeper, and then getting it into the body and trying it out until it becomes a new habit, till you create the muscle memory. So all my work is around that. It's dealing with the fundamental question that I've always had, going back to my childhood in Queens, New York, which was a challenging childhood, and just tracking how people were treating each other, and just like, why are people treating each other this way, knowing it could be different? And the fundamental question I had is, why is it, even though we know better, even though we're a relatively intelligent species, and we have all the information we need at our fingertips, we've seen great advancements in technology and science, why is it, even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? And on a larger scale, crime and war and hunger and oppression. Now, most people would just say, well, that's just the way we are. And that is actually an accurate answer. That is just the way we are. But I was never satisfied with that answer. And my whole life has been an investigation of understanding. The answer is, it's in our human behavior. The answer, it starts and ends with our human behavior. And that is one way that I see hope. All the problems that we're facing on this planet, you could say all of them. I'm sure some could argue some, but certainly in terms of war and what we're seeing, are person-made problems. These are things that human beings created. So therefore, if human beings created it, human beings can stop it, right? It's just based on a whole bunch of assumptions and mental constructs that we create about borders, about what separates us, which is an illusion. Nothing separates us. We are all interconnected and interdependent. Separation is an illusion. It's a mental construct, something that we all choose to believe. And therefore, since we choose to believe it, we can choose to unbelieve it. But that is, so I always say, the problems in our world are complicated. The solutions are really quite simple. Implementing the simple solutions is hard work. And that brings it back to what my work has always been. It's like just seeing people out of alignment with what they're saying and what they're doing. People who, throughout my journey, who had amazing gifts and talents and wisdom and capacity and passion to have an impact in the world, but couldn't seem to step into their power or find their voice. And that's really where the respectful confrontation work came from. It was more to help people stand in their power, speak their truth, get their needs met in a way where they don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed. And for me, I purposely chose respectful confrontation because there's a kind of a challenge in that. There's a tension in those words that creates I would call an alchemy. It's in that uncomfortable state, that tension, that new solutions emerge, that deepening of relationship, that creativity happens. And I felt that a lot of the models that were out there in terms of self-empowerment and self-awareness were not addressing the fact that people can have a big smile on their face and say the most polite things and still do the most horrible things to one another, and that disconnect. I call it, we all suffer from chronic niceness. And we all, whether you're the perpetrator of chronic niceness or the victim of chronic niceness, we're all suffering from it. That's a big part of the work. So that's where the work started, is just helping individuals and organizations figure out where are they out of alignment with themselves and with each other, and then restore balance. And a lot of times that has to do with just healing and reconciliation, and that's just a start. So that's a I would say that's a beginning point of what I'm doing, just in a very general sense.
So that again is one-on-one work, teamwork, things of that nature, right? Workshops, presentations, talks.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
So you had mentioned your childhood in Queens. At this point, I always want to ask, I want to find out a little more about my guest's background. So what did the first couple steps into your career look like? More like high school into the college age, when you're leaving the home or whatever the situation might be, what were the first couple steps you took into what you wanted your career to be at the time that led up to where you are now?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. Like I said, I could never have planned where I am now. So I started studying and practicing acting when I was 12. I went to an acting school on Union Turnpike in Queens and took my first acting classes. And in high school, I was doing semi-professional theater while I was studying acting, and I took that into university, studying classical acting. So that was really my, but I always say what I learned there is that I say acting is the science of human behavior. For an actor to play another human being, they have to understand how human beings tick, right? And they have to have a certain level of empathy. All the things that we're looking for in the world right now, you have to be able to take a distance from studying that character, whether they're evil, a murderer, or whether they're a prince or a princess, right? You have to, how do you get under their skin and get to know them? So, and understand how human behavior influences how we are with each other. So I feel like I've got to start at a young age. I was very lucky to have someone suggest that I do Tai Chi when I was a young man, and that changed everything for me. It helped me deal with my anxiety. My childhood was pretty volatile, very volatile, including my dad being in jail for a while when I was around 12 years old. So that's what I'm coming from. So the Tai Chi helped me work through my own trauma, my own anxiety. It helped me understand mind-body connection. It helped me to understand and how, the difference between force and power, and how to use force, and how, when force becomes aggression, when it becomes assertiveness. How to the most fun part of the respectful confrontation work is the part that deals with other people's reactivity. How do you effectively, with flexibility and grounding and focus, deal with unconscious harm, passive aggression, all of those things that we usually get triggered by, and that to just make different choices. So I brought in a lot of the martial arts and Tai Chi, the acting as well. And the big significant moment when I was 22 was I decided I was going to bum around Europe for a year. When I did that, I started in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I stayed for 18 years. And I did theater there, started a theater company, and had my own acting style. And it was in that acting style that I developed my form of facilitation, which was, I would say, yes, people learned what acting was, but their lives were transforming. It was really more transformative. And I took all of that, and then doing the corporate trainings in communication and dealing with aggression around the world that I was doing at that time, and brought that all together to create the respectful confrontation model, which,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I do that for individuals, for their own empowerment. And I've been invited into many different organizations to come and do that as a conflict resolution or conflict prevention method, leadership. And I've added things along the way, but that's the journey up to that point.
Yeah. Joe, what when you talk about your acting style, what goes into that? What makes that different than another form of acting, another traditional form of acting? What's the differentiation there?
Well, because it was based on Tai Chi, it was based on understanding the dynamics of energy and mind body, It was based on seeing yourself as an instrument, like a cellist would. The cellist is a person that plays with a wooden instrument. So, but the actor is the instrument themselves, and at the same time the artist. So, understanding how to see yourself both as an instrument, as an artist. So it was a very embodied practice. It was, and ultimately, it was helping people align their thoughts, their heads, their hearts, and their bodies to come into their true power, and then to be able to from there resonate and play characters in a sense. And I would say, I'm sorry, but I think also was important the fundamental process of that process was cultivating presence and connection. And that continues to be an important part of respectful confrontation, of fierce civility, all the work I do. The thing that's lacking on the planet right now is we are so lost and distracted that we don't have connection. We're not present. We're not connected to ourselves. And a lot of us are isolated and not connected. And that, to me, is a number one solution for what we're approaching.
There's just so much that you just went into, Joe. So many things that you've mentioned where it's like, yes, yes, yes. Like, just the way that we don't communicate, the way that it is easy, the way that there are no real boundaries. It's funny because I have my idea of why that happens. And it's a part of different things, right? But I have the one factor that stands out, and you haven't mentioned it at all. You've mentioned the other side of it, more or less the other side of it. So anytime I think of these conversations, it's fear. Like people are scared of what may be taken away from them. Where you've mentioned more hope. So yeah, you haven't mentioned that word fear, but I'm curious about your idea of including that word in that conversation. Where does it fit in there?
I mean, I think it's great you bring it up. I think it's and it is important, and I talk about that when there's uncertainty, when we suffer from higher levels of anxiety. So anxiety, I would use anxiety more than fear, but there's a deep-seated fear, and that's the fundamental premise of the new book, Fear Civility, is that we're not going to see solutions to our world problems if we're all in a state of some level of trauma, whether that's personal trauma, cultural trauma, generational trauma, economic trauma, whatever it might be, climate change trauma. As long as we're in these states of trauma, the nervous system's in a fight, flight, freeze response, which means that anything that is new will be perceived as a threat, and most likely a threat to their lives. So how do you expect people to open up and reconcile and heal and connect if they're in this state of fight, flight, freeze? So fear is a fundamental part of it. But the way I would approach it is with the respectful confrontation and the fear civility work, to train people to upgrade their own communication skills to be able to hold higher levels of fear and resistance in themselves and others without spinning out into old patterns of fight and of either aggression or passivity. This idea that not only to be able to confront others respectfully, but confront aspects of yourself that are in fear, right? So that in that way, fear is an important part. My fundamental belief is that we are all fully powerful. I mean, there's another part of the respectful confrontation work is a system I developed called the 4 Pillars of Resilient Power, which is discovering different ways of tapping into authentic power that's not brute force. And I start with the premise is that we are already fully powerful. We can't become more powerful. We can't become less powerful. The work we need to do is to confront the things that are keeping us from accessing that power. That's the work. But the power is there to be tapped into.
This is a question I typically bring up to coaches that I interview on here or have conversations with. It's one that usually comes up, but since you mentioned like just all this self-awareness, this self-realization, actualization, acknowledgement, just looking inward, have you done, you said young adults. What does the work with young adults look like?
Well, it's just giving them basic tools in nervous system regulation, understanding the importance of that. It's also giving them an understanding that of understanding what consequences mean. That all thoughts, words, and actions have an effect, and how much are you concerned with the consequences of that? This idea of the 4 pillars of resilient power: grounding, focus, strength, and flexibility. Doing exercises that are really simple and fun that can get them in their body and get to know themselves in a different way.
Yeah.
I had one woman say to me when she did the exercise around grounding, my friends have always said to me, "You seem very anxious," she said. And after doing this exercise, I now know what it's like to be calm for the first time. And now I know what they meant. So there's people really, that's the importance of the embodied work, John, is that people, it's not just an idea, people get to a direct experience of it.
That's amazing. That's amazing, because I always talk about, when we're going through school, when we're going through our education, when we're getting prepared for our careers, and we don't have anything like what you're discussing here. I mean, while I was going through school, even my 8-year-old has something that they're dealing more with their emotions, identifying emotions, and as they move through the grades, they give them more words to kind of narrow down how they're really feeling. So that to me is an improvement. But I'd love to see something like this part of the curriculum, because I think we're prepared for careers, but we're not prepared for life. We're not prepared for each other. You mentioned chronic niceness. I think a lot of people try to maintain that toxic positivity to keep things perfect, I guess, or ideal, or idealistic, or idyllic. But in the meantime, they have so much that they want to share, but they're just trying to kind of not rock the boat. So they kind of suppress what they're thinking. And it just, again, I say this sometimes, but it's not to appease anybody here or you. It's just like you mentioned, you touch so many different things that I think about regularly because of everything that's going on around the world, because of social media and heightened anxiety, and being able to, we as humans we're not meant to live in real time a war that's taking place around the world, or 2 wars. Like, we just have so much access, and our brains are so complicated. They're very complex, but they're also very simple.
That's just the thing. When you're in your heart, things are very simple. When you're in, the solution is for me is we need to get out of our heads as much as we are, get into our bodies and our hearts. And again, the solution is to be in alignment of the intellect and reasoning of the heart, where compassion resides, and connection and respect and our high values, wisdom as opposed to intellect. And our bodies inform us keep us present and connected, and so the goal is to be, but we're so in our heads, that the fact that people can say with full conviction, I have a right to kill those people, ...
Mm-hmm.
And from an if we're in an intellect, we can kind of get into the game of like, well, yeah, I guess if you if you rationalize it, and if you look at statistics, you could. But if you took a moment to breathe into your heart, into that authentic place, it would just make you burst into tears. That someone is actually so far in their whatever they're in, that they can say the words, I have the right to kill someone. Right, John? I mean, that's
absolutely.
And because of the internet, because of coming out of the pandemic, because of all that, we're so much more programmed to now be online. We're not connecting in nature. We're not connecting in rooms with each other. We're not breathing the same oxygen, as I always say.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about religious wars, because in these particular examples, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The line is clear. I'm on this side, you're on that side. And there seems to be more tolerant. What's crazy, Joe, is just what you mentioned about seeing each other. The way that people pile into social media, they pile on. You see things on the news, talk shows, whatever it may be, this side versus that side. Yes, our group versus your group. But then when you get people, sometimes when you get people from each group to sit down and talk, if you don't get them to sit down and talk one-on-one, they're just talking against the other idea.
Yeah.
They're not aiming to learn about the other side, their experiences, what they're bringing to the table. It's just, I'm standing with my group. I have a role to play. I'm against your group. But it's amazing when you can sit two people down and actually have them learn about each other individually. But the opportunity for that rarely exists
At the moment,
at the moment.
or not enough. And I think
Yes.
that's really it. And because it is a long and messy process. It's a very messy process that could take years. I've done some mediation work, and I've worked with refugees from the Balkans when I was in Amsterdam, from the Balkans in the 90s, and I've worked in the Middle East, and I've worked in these places. And again, the task, the way I would approach it is, we've got to get people together, and we've got to find a way to get back to our humanity, get back to our hearts, which doesn't mean that anyone has to give up anything at that point. It just simply means, are you willing to do the courageous work of doing that? And
Absolutely.
That's messy, because in that, a lot of pain and a lot of historical pain and a lot of will come up, which needs to be healed, which needs the time to heal it, which needs forgiveness needs to happen, mercy needs to happen, and so that reconciliation can happen, so that people can actually get to a point of, okay, so we may have different views. I don't have to see you anymore as my adversary. Maybe you're just a stranger. You're just someone who's different than me.
Yeah.
And that the key to the work, I think, what gives me hope, how do we must, all of us, commit to finding alliances in surprising places.
Absolutely. Joe, so does it make sense from your childhood and what your experience was then that you're doing the work that you're doing now? How do you reconcile those?
I think it totally does. Like I said, I got to study and observe. One of the jokes I say is that, because everyone says, Joe, why is all your work about conflict and confrontation? And I say, well, I grew up in New York City. Every day was an examination of confrontation and conflict, which was great. I mean, and I learned a lot. You learn a lot. You learn how to live with strangers, and you don't have to love them. You don't even have to like them, and you do have to. There's a certain level of we have to figure out how to make this work. Right. So I'm very grateful for that. And with the challenges, that it helped me cultivate resilience. It helped me to study what was happening with my parents, my father, and other people around me, and just say, I can make those choices and end up there, but I made different choices. And I made a point to see where my father got caught up in things he shouldn't have gotten caught up in. And it wasn't serious. It was a petty crime that he spent time in jail with. But to still see that, okay, so, my life's work has been to help people find their power and to transcend the things that are keeping them in situations that are not good for them. The sweet thing that, John, is that I also have done work with incarcerated men, and when I was living in California, in a California state prison. And when I went to my very first session, which I talk about in my new book, it's a great story. I realized I was the same age as my father was when he was in jail. So when I went to jail, you could say, in a sense, we were the same age.
Wow. Yeah. So, Joe, for you, when you talk about these were the decisions that my father made, I chose to make different decisions to not end up down that path. Was that you just really taking in what his experience was, or the experience was for you as well? Or was it guidance from your mom or somebody else? So like, what was it that, because I mean, you hear so many stories about people that have had parents that were incarcerated and they fall down that path. So what were the forces that kind of kept you away from going down that path?
I think it was the time. I mean, we're going back a number of decades, right? So I think the time was different. And I think, the influence of my mother and my background. I mean, I was still, I was, education was very important. So it wasn't like, and my dad, even though he made mistakes, he still had ethical code. He was still, you know what I mean? he did love us, and he did his best in the way he treated us, to treat us well. So I had a great education, in New York City decades ago, I had a great public school education. And I think it was in my heart, I always knew that was the thing, is like, we should know better, and could see that there was something larger than me, and larger than my world, and larger than all of us. And I had faith in that.
Joe, what is because of your experience, everything you've seen in your career, the work that you do now, what does leadership mean to you?
Leadership, I can say a lot about that, but is what an important concept for me is being a nurturer and a protector. That's what leadership is, and I do a lot of work in my work with the Weston network. Is, our tagline is creating cultures of mutual empowerment. And that, for me, I did, when I was working with the combat veterans, there were some people who were doing equine therapy. So I learned a lot about the behavior of horses. And I don't know if you know this, maybe everybody knows this, that horses lead from behind. That when you see horses moving over an environment, the one in the back is the leader. So this idea of servant leadership, this idea of leading from behind, this idea of nurturing and protecting, this idea of my task as a leader, or how I train leaders, is to create an environment of safety and trust, where there's transparency, where there's respect, there's accountability, inclusivity, and creating an environment where you cultivate each person to step into their own personal leadership. I call that transformational leadership.
Are the foundations of your thinking on that based on acting? Or is it another particular area of your career? Like, where does that come from? That, because when somebody says servant leadership or empowerment or fostering, there's just certain words that people use where I'm curious about what their experience was that has led them to think about it in that particular way.
That's interesting.
Because when you were talking about empowering someone else, I just pictured you being on stage with somebody and working off of someone else's energy and kind of supporting in that nature. But that's just my kind of thinking. Just
well,
curious.
No, I love that. I never thought of it that way. But for a good director is someone who can still create exactly the image that they want, right? They have a clear direction where things are going, and at the same time, how each person in the ensemble step into their power to activate their creativity. So I guess you could say that. I think it also comes, John, from the fact that I'm very suspicious of leadership. So
I love the way you keep chuckling as you're talking about certain things. I love that. That resonates with me, just because, I mean, that's just the kind of person I am. But I'm sorry. What? Go ahead, Joe.
No, suspicious. So suspicious of leadership, and so I studied what I think was a good leader or not, and a lot of that had to do with honesty and integrity and authenticity. There was another piece to that, and I'm not sure. But that's what I would go for right now. Just is that, it's
one more follow-up before we jump to the next question.
Sure.
Is there a leader, you don't have to name them, but that kind of sparked that suspicious of leadership, that suspicion that you had of leadership? Is there one that you had or came across, you're like, something's not right, something doesn't feel right, now I got to be on the lookout for this when I make my way through my life and career?
I would say that it probably the easier answer would be the ones who haven't activated suspicion in me.
What's going on here that nothing seems off? Those are the people you can't trust.
Yeah. But the key to it is transparency and vulnerability, right? So the key to my work is, one of the fundamental keys is, it's in your vulnerability that your true power is revealed. So for someone who can activate that, who can be vulnerable and still feel that they are a leader, that are humble.
Absolutely. Love that. Thank you. So Joe, at this point, let's jump into the book. Why don't you introduce the book that we're going to cover? And if you could, just some backstory that led up to your writing the book.
Well, the book I think we're discussing is Mastering Respectful Confrontation, right? So I wrote that book because people said, Joe, you got to write the book. That's why. And I said, I don't want to write the book. And they said, Joe, you got to write the book. So I created the workshop first, and started. And I was doing that. Like I said, it started, and that was 2005. I had just come back from Europe to be in the U.S. and I started in Northern California. And I had all the pieces together, and I just thought this was the opportunity for me. One of the reasons why I wanted to come back to the States was to see if there was something I can do to help good people who I felt were, again, one of the questions of all the work I do is, how do you confront a bully without becoming a bully? And I saw in politics, I saw it in business, I saw it on all sectors that particularly American culture rewards the bully. And for those who aren't bullies, we were in a bad place because we didn't want to be a bully. So the only other alternative we thought we had was to just be passive and submissive. And that, to me, was the core of the work: is how do you help people stand in their power without it be assertive, without it becoming aggressive? And did that for individuals. And then one client, for instance, NASA, started hiring me, and I worked for them for 12 years doing the training. And then different organizations around the world and invited me in to do this training. And it basically, at a certain point, someone said, you really should write the book about this. So I did. And that's really the story. That's really the story. The Mastering Respectful Confrontation book is pretty much an outline of the training and all aspects of it. It includes exercises, it includes contemplations, and various insights. And I make it very personable, and it's and like my second book as well. I feel like what I wanted to do, because that's how I facilitate, is I take in a workshop, I take participants through a journey. It's a journey of discovery, that they're not the same at the end than they were at the beginning. And I'm very grateful and I feel blessed that people trust me to allow me to guide them into that journey. And I try to do the same thing in the book as well, that takes people through a journey.
So great cue into the next question, Joe. So what is that journey? What does that look like in the book? You don't have to go into too much detail, but if there are chapters, what is that progression, or how is it that you lay out the message for your readers?
Well, I set the context of, what from a global perspective and also a personal perspective of the world needs more people to step up and speak their authentic truth in a way where they don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed. And in the workshop and in the book, I lay out the challenges of that. If it was easy for us to confront respectfully, we would be doing it, right? And to, like you had already alluded to this, John, is that I purposely use those two words, respectful confrontation, because there's a tension in that. It creates an alchemy, and oftentimes I say, and I've seen it happen, that in a relationship or in a work environment in the past where there were no solutions, suddenly new solutions emerge through this process, because people then are trained to be in the uncomfortable. And so the training is like a sports training or martial arts training, athletes training, where you train yourself to hold higher levels of stress without spinning out or going into fight, flight, freeze, where you can still have effective decision making. So it's not about getting rid of the uncomfortable, those difficult conversations and challenges. Yes. It's about being skillful and confident in the uncomfortable. So I lay out that framework, and I break it up into 4 parts, the method into 4 parts, and therefore the book, which is one way to look at the journey, and that all 4 parts are important in how to engage with people with challenging situations. The first one is the practice of respectful self, is cultivating yourself and cultivating skills to be more centered, and self-awareness of what are your values, what do you value, things like that. The second is respect and presence, right? The second is respectful engagement. How do I actually connect with someone? What does that truly mean? Being in the room with someone doesn't necessarily imply that we're connected. What's authentic connection? How is my words what's the impact it's having? Understanding more how to understand what's hidden in the other person, what you don't necessarily see in the words, like the iceberg model, right? Communication. That's respectful engagement. The next is respectful offense from a martial arts perspective, this idea of how do I assert myself, my truth, that's not aggressive but assertive. And then I mentioned earlier, the last part that is respectful defense is learning the different levels of aggression from others and strategies about how to deal with the different levels of aggression so that A, you take care of yourself, you're safe, and you don't let other people's reactivity derail you from the purpose of your conversation.
I love all of that. I love it because it starts with you. It starts with the person. Just whenever I've seen conversations that went south, whether it was online, whether it was in person, you don't know for sure, but usually the person that would take it to a point where it didn't need to go, you could tell they were in that reactive mode, that fearful mode, that fight, freeze. So I just think it's always resonated with me. If you have a good idea of who you are, what you're about, your values, people can still shake you, but your foundation is a little sturdier, so you're
Right.
not going to be shaken as much. So
Right.
that I love, and I think that's what people need to understand about themselves, to look for, to read of themselves. I love how this, although it's about confrontation with others, right? Confrontation in general, it starts and it's richly deep with the self and learning about, because people may say, "Oh, I know myself. I know myself." But you just don't, because when you start asking certain questions, even about yourself, and answering those questions that you never thought about before, you're going to have a lot of moments and aha moments that
Right.
you didn't consider before, because we don't really do the deep thinking of who we are and what we need. Again, life every day is just reaction, reaction, reaction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you'll appreciate this, John. And particularly when I would do my trainings at NASA, at the end of all of my trainings, I'll always ask the group, just say in a few words, what was this experience for you at the end of the day? And the thing that I heard over and over and over again from all of the NASA trainings I did was that people would say, I never considered that the problem I'm having with my work colleague, that I was contributing to some of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's revolutionary. If that when someone can get to that insight, right? That's huge, I think.
Yeah.
And then that they take that back home to their families and the people around them. That's and if you look at what's playing out in the world, if more of us were able to just do that, John, can you imagine? And that to take some level of responsibility for what's unfolding on this planet and not get into the what you had mentioned, taking sides and all of that.
Yeah, and the thing is, the taking responsibility, I think you had mentioned it or alluded to it before, Joe, is even when you take responsibility, it doesn't mean you're losing anything. It's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just by taking responsibility doesn't mean somebody's getting more than you, doesn't mean you're letting anyone take anything away from you. But again, that plays into that self-discovery, what's really important and how easy the solution can be. But again, we just have those blockages in our minds about where we feel safe, I guess.
Yeah. No, I love that you bring up safety and fear. And those are important things at this time. But I think what's also important is that we're not only not looking at ourselves more deeply, which we all can, we're not investigating the words that we're using. And I think, and I'd like to give two examples based on what we were just saying. So I think that, like if I say love, what love means to me is going to be different for you, but if the problems start when I assume that how I see love is the way you see it.
Yeah.
And not consider, that your whole relationship with that could be different, right? Just
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And I think the two words that I think we have forgotten that there are many layers to are the words responsibility and understanding, right? So I think a lot of people say, we're afraid to say about someone who has a different viewpoint, I understand what you're saying. Because understanding doesn't necessarily mean I agree with you. It simply means I comprehend. I have fully understood, you've given me all the data and now I understand what your viewpoint is. that doesn't mean I'm complying or I'm agreeing with you. And the same thing with responsibility. I can personally take responsibility for what's happening in the world without feeling like it's my fault, right? So that's, again, if we say, if we take responsibility, we have to it's a shame we do it. We have to somehow say, then therefore it's my fault. But it doesn't. I'm just going to take responsibility. It's not my fault that someone on the street dumps garbage on the street. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. But I can take responsibility to pick it up and throw it in the bin, which is right there, right?
That's a great point. But regarding responsibility and fault, that's a very great point. Just that I have the responsibility, but it doesn't mean that I'm at fault. Doesn't mean that anybody's going to give me dirty looks. It doesn't mean that I'm admitting guilt of anything. It's just I'll pick it up from here and move forward.
Yeah. And if we and that's what the world needs now. What the world needs now is to us to realize that, at least the belief I have, we are all interdependent and interconnected. We always have been, and we always will be. Especially now with the internet and the global economy and climate change and all of that, we're so reliant on each other that it's not feasible for us to sit back and not take some kind of level of responsibility for the consequences we're seeing.
Absolutely. So, Joe, each chapter in your book, is it you write about the topic, give some examples, are there exercises? What can people find in the structure of the chapters of the book?
So it's broken up into those 4 parts that I mentioned, the different parts of the practice: respectful self, engagement, offense, defense. And in each part, there are a series of exercises and theory that you read about, and then at the end, there's always an exercise that you can do. For many of them, there's exercises you can do. You could read the book, just read it, right? That's how a lot of these books are. Or you could take 2 to 4 years and go through it slowly, right? So, that's that. And at the end of every chapter, there is some key points and some contemplations to help you digest and integrate some of what was in that chapter.
Joe, I'm always curious, in writing it, what lessons did you take away from the book when it came out? Obviously, it was your work up until then. It was based on your workshop, but was there anything that changed in you because of writing it? Maybe rethinking things, maybe refining things. Anything change at all for you in the publishing of the book?
Yes. Let's see. Well, I think I became my communication became clearer, because I had to really, it was a whole different way of communicating, to have to take what I'm doing with a group, orally, to then put it on paper and to make sure it's clear in that way. Help me understand more clearly what my structure is and how I go from one piece to the next. And just the process of writing, I don't wish it on anybody, John.
Yeah. I love when my authors on here say that, because it's just, it's you see the finished the product at the end. You see how beautiful it is, how cohesive it is, and concise and everything. But just the war, I can imagine, behind the scenes of the editing, the rethinking, and maybe doubt in some cases.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you went through.
Yeah. So I think that's it. Like I ran a marathon, and just the pride of having done that, and like, oh my God, why do people put themselves through it? But then when you're done, it's like, oh, I feel like I accomplished something. So there's that.
You get it. Joe, you had mentioned, obviously, and I had mentioned in your bio, your other book. If you could just kind of give us a breakdown of what that book is about, when you would put that book out, just anything you want to share.
Yeah, the book Fear Civility, it takes the respectful confrontation work further. The way I see it is the respectful confrontation is focused on how to respectfully, effectively confront those around you and yourself. This was really for me and what was breaking my heart about what was unfolding in the planet, and just trying to make sense of it, and wanting to offer people a pathway to hope, to make sense of what's happening with the world system. So it's in a sense, how can an individual confront the world system, which seems like Goliath? What's a Dave?
Yeah, like daunting. Yeah, yeah.
It is daunting, and it's, and I always say, and that's because all of my work is about power, right? So, and I say often, you may not have power today to shift some of the world issues that are happening, but where do you have power, and start there.
That's say that again one more time, please, because
Okay.
that's just something that resonates. Because I'm always thinking about people that say I have no power, there's nothing that I can change. But so because they can't make these huge, audacious changes, large changes, they kind of give up on those everyday little things that they can do, those little gestures, movements, conversations
Yeah.
that can kind of ripple into bigger things, and they always doubt themselves.
Yeah, I mean that's what the world system is doing a good job of, keeping us dysregulated, keeping us constantly craving something that we don't have. Right? That's advertising.
Yeah.
The dysregulation is like, what we're seeing play out in politics, and the way the media and the news activates us. I was shocked, having lived in Europe for a while, coming back and seeing the new phenomenon. I'm going back a couple of decades of 24-hour weather channels. And and I'm watching, and I'm like, oh my God, it's frightening. They've
Yeah.
anthropomorphized the storm, that it's someone who is that's out to get you. So, and it makes sense, and I bring this up in my book, is that that's what we're suffering from. We're suffering from information inflation. There's too many news sources chasing too few stories, which means that you inflate the story, make it more dramatic and conflictual than it probably is, so that your outlet is the one that people watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're in a constant state of dysregulation, and because of the pandemic, and because the world system is really good in keeping us online, we're not meeting in town halls, we're not meeting at pubs, we're not meeting, we're not, all the things that we were doing in religious places, which means we're isolated. So we've become very lonely, we become very depressed, anxious, separated, isolated, all of those things. So I say that, where do we have power? The most revolutionary thing we can do right now is take care of ourselves, increase our resilience and our self-care, so that we stay vital, and purposefully cultivate and deepen relationships.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not just, like I said, not just being on a Zoom meeting or whatever, but really taking care of one another. That comes back to leadership, nurturing and protecting. What if the most effective thing you can do right now is to nurture and protect yourself, to nurture and protect those around you, and in your civility work, in terms of having these challenging conversations, which end up to nurture and protect the integrity of that conversation, so it doesn't devolve into polarization and antagonism.
Yeah, to nurture and protect. I mean, those are also ideals I want to pass down to my kids. They're 8 years old, they're 4 years old, a year and a half old, 3 kids. Um, you say you kind of convey that to them in their own language if the opportunity comes up. But yeah, it's definitely something that I want to ingrain in there just to consider it and think about it. I think kind of have to pay it forward with that mindset in terms of what I learned from people like you, other authors that I talk to, anything that I see in the world, kind of just to try to provide that, not just information, but the wisdom about they can look
Yeah,
at it, how they can consider all sides of it, how they can think again.
yeah, that's beautiful, John. Your kids are lucky to have a father like you.
I'm trying, Joe.
That's the best you can do. But that's
Absolutely.
and that's in the fierce civility. A lot of it is, I offer one of the it's about skills and strategies, and different kinds of skills, about how to upgrade your skills to be able to deal with the level of lack of civility, but do that in a way where you don't feel bullied and you don't get caught up becoming a bully. One of the skills is the power of the pivot, and learning how to, when you're in the stagnation of polarization, and how to pivot out of that. And the book is filled with them. And one of them to consider is that, with your children, is that we get stuck in this win-lose thing. Like, right. So, and I have very clear ideas about that. We don't need to have the false polarity of win-lose. That the true polarity of winning is not winning.
Mm-hmm.
So win, not win. Not winning doesn't make you a loser.
Mm.
Right. So if that's one thing, is that, I don't believe that every child should get a ribbon. Right. I think that there should be some value and for the kid who does come in first, that there's an incentive that and that they want to continue, and that you just help the other kids who didn't win go through the hurt of that, regulate the nervous system, and then feel the incentive to want to come back the next time smarter and more effective. Then I call
Absolutely.
that benevolent competition. Competition's essential,
Yeah,
but to do it in a way where it's about empowering one another, not taking each other down.
I agree. I agree completely. I think it's amazing having young kids and still feeling like a kid myself. It's almost like I'm a good dad, yeah, but it's like I have no business having kids because I still feel like a
Yeah.
kid myself. But to have those conversations with my oldest, because he's all about winning, 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 and when it doesn't happen, being able to have those conversations, respecting his feelings, what he wants for himself, but just a learning process, that everything that doesn't go his way is a learning process. And that's just, to me, again, is that paying it forward, that ripple effect of seeing the bullshit in the world, learning from people like you, being curious, and then
Yeah.
kind of planting that seed in the way that he thinks for himself. It's
Yeah.
just huge. So I appreciate everything you've shared. And Joe, you had mentioned, and I want to say that the reason, I think you had told me, you had conveyed you had two books. We were talking about which one we wanted to cover mainly on this one, the main book for this episode. I think I picked Confrontation just because I think you had shared that it was first confrontation and then that fierce civility.
Yeah.
But I think our biggest hiccup is we don't get to that point where we confront others enough or
Yeah.
speak up for ourselves or speak up for what we need. So that's the one that I wanted to focus on. This one, I would love to have you back for fierce civility. And you had also mentioned before we started some other books that you wanted to mention. Could you go through those and just share those?
Well, I just, because that was your request. Do you have any books that have inspired you? And I just was like, oh, well, can I come up with something? And I did. I mean, is that interesting to share?
Absolutely, please.
Well, one book that really had a strong impact on me was called The Famished Road by Ben Okri, Okri, Nigerian writer. He run the Booker Prize for that. That's going back a few decades now. It's he does a beautiful, it's magical realism. At least that's how I would define it. I'm not a book expert, so I don't know what the proper definitions are, but there is definitely that aspect, which I like. I like the idea of and at the same time, he's writing a book about just how the challenges and just how awful it is to be a poor person in Nigeria, in a village in Nigeria.
So what does
So
that mean to you, Joe? Magical realism.
that it's a mix of a situation that is a realistic situation, but aspects of the mystical comes in, spirits,
Okay.
or just other realities in a sense, the more fantastical, I guess you
Okay.
could say. But it's not a fantasy novel, because it's very much steeped in a small village in Nigeria, while Western companies are coming in and tearing it down, in a sense. So I was just moved by it, by the story of this, seeing it through the eyes of a young boy, and his relationship with his father, and his journey, and as well getting really strong commentary about life and suffering. So, and it's very dense. It's a one paragraph you could read for a while and just to digest it. And yeah.
I'll look into that. Joe, what do you think? When did Fierce Civility come out?
This past March 2023. So it's
Oh,
been a
okay.
little over a half a year. Yeah.
Okay. Because usually if I have authors on, I always ask them, so what's up for their next writing?
Don't ask.
Too soon, right? Too soon.
Too soon.
All
Yeah.
right, I'll skip it this time. I'll ask it the next time we talk.
Yeah.
Joe, and starting to wrap up, how would you share this book, Mastering Confrontation? How would you share that with somebody who maybe doesn't believe it's for them? How can you convey that urgency to them? Like, this is almost like not a selling point in the podcast, in the episode, but how do you really convey the urgency of that message you're trying to share to somebody that you would like to read the book?
I think that's just a question of, it's called mastering respectful confrontation, and it's dealing with it. On some level, you could say it's how to deal with difficult conversations and with difficult people. But again, with the 4 pillars of resilient power, it's really a journey into your own self-discovery, and it has helped me, and it's helped a lot of people kind of clarify for how to be in the world in a way that works for them. So so if anybody at this moment is feeling disempowered and can't find their power, or they maybe 10 years ago or even 2 years ago felt like they had a sense of power, but because the world is shifting so much and there's so much, and is now feeling like that's not working anymore, I think the work is good to help you get back to yourself, to your authentic self, and rediscover who you are and how you can be in relationship with the world as it currently is. And if you're feeling like you're not, there's a lack of vitality, this work, I say, helps you cultivate physical vitality, emotional stability, mental clarity, and spiritual grounding. And if you feel like you're not able to tap into that, then I think the book can support you in that in very simple and easy and ways. And if you're not feeling fulfilled or satisfied, or you're not feeling like you're getting your voice out there in a way that it can, I just think it's a personal way to explore that, and to reframe, and to look at a lot of the unexamined assumptions we have around all of this, right? And a lot of fears.
Yeah. I agree. I think it is a powerful tool. I know with clients that I've worked with in terms of leadership, when they get to the point where they're unhappy or they want to do this work with me and they want to take that path, that journey, a lot of them, when they come back around to success, it's because they have gone back to their past and picked themselves up, or picked up their values, or picked up their passions and brought that forward. So I can't stress it enough just how important that just self-assessment, self-understanding, that you may think you know yourself. There are everyday wants and desires that we have, and that we do know what we want and desire, yes, but there's so much work that goes deeper than that. And I think discovering that for ourselves can help us reconcile to what's out there, and especially demonstrate who we are. I think a lot of us sink into whatever malaise or anxiety or stress because we're not showing enough of who we are. Right. I think we're maybe calling up what we think the world wants to see of us without reconciling that to who we really are. So I love that message, Joe. Thank you for writing that book. I think it's timely now, even though you wrote it so long ago. It's timely now.
Yeah. Well, if I can say, you brought up a good point. For the people that are saying, like, it seems so big, how can I possibly have an impact? Well, you get to decide what your scope of influence is, right? So if I'm walking down the street and I see someone's garbage laying in the street and I pick it up and put it in the bin, that's not going to change the climate issue, but it's a step. It's something, at least it's something that I can feel good about myself, that I've done something. And it's not about me feeling good about myself. It's about me living in alignment with my values. And so many of us at this moment, if that's all we do is take care of ourselves, cultivate relationships, and just stay connected to our own highest values, and not get pulled into what many people are being pulled into, you get to decide what your scope of influence is. If it's just your family, that you've done your responsibility, right? That's the responsibility piece. You don't have to transform a whole nation. Mm-hmm. Just your family. Yeah. Just your community, just your work environment. If you commit to that, you've done all you need to do, and you can feel satisfied and content in that, and fulfilled.
Yeah, just in you sharing what you just did, Joe, I remember a couple of years ago when our country was really bad, and some friends were losing hope. They didn't want to watch the news anymore. Look what the world's turned into. My attitude was just like, okay, I can't control the world at the higher level. I can't control the country at the higher level. I can't impact that overtly right away. but I can handle my community. I can do the good in my community. I can volunteer in my community. Um, so yeah, I just want people to take that especially away, is just realize how much you can impact in your everyday. I think we underestimate that. Again, it doesn't have to be a big, hairy, audacious goal that you have to get right away. I think people don't think about how much of an impact they can make. And that's where they get lost. But before I forget, Joe, at the top of the conversation, you had mentioned hope. So can you speak a little about hope before we start closing out? Whatever thoughts may come to mind.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, anything at all. Anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm involved with a lot of organizations around the world and people around the world, thousands and thousands of organizations and people that I don't know them all directly, but that are working towards peace, world peace, that are working towards solving some of our world problems. We don't see about them on the media because it's not sexy to the media. It doesn't sell, right? But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I have direct experience of seeing that there are, I believe, more people on this planet who want to see us a peaceful world and want to see us evolve than there are that don't. And that they're there. And you're one of them. I'm one of them. I'd like to believe, hopefully everyone listening, I would say, is one of them. And that, again, it's our obligation and responsibility to just do our part and find ways to connect with one another. That's how we become powerful. So that gives me hope. It gives me hope that there are many people in the discussions about some of our larger contentious issues at the moment who are looking to bridge, who are looking for ways to, who can see that get past the intellectual stuff and get to the heart and say, this is just, it's not common sense. It's not, there's no wisdom here. I see it directly. And I always say that, I believe, I say this in my Fear Civility book in the beginning, in the introduction, I believe that someone yesterday pulled a person out of a burning car and saved their lives. I have to believe of 8 billion people that one person did that. That one person got up in the morning, made breakfast for a neighbor, and brought it over who knew that that neighbor was struggling and didn't have enough food, right? I trust these things, that at least one person is doing that. And as long as it's even just 1 out of 8 billion that are doing it, that gives me hope.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, especially just the networking piece where my network has been amazing. I connected with so many different people, but it's amazing knowing that people like you are out there doing that work. Um, I don't think too often we see that on social media, what somebody's intentions are. I mean, I see what you share, so absolutely, I get that sense. But just having these conversations, I love the fact that I know and have learned from somebody that's trying to create that ripple effect, teaching people to see those things in themselves and their community. So I'm appreciative of just that connection, because when I stand up from this desk, I'm going to feel a lot better that Joe Weston is out there doing amazing work throughout the world, like literally.
Well, good. Then I'll stand up and I'll feel good knowing you're doing that as well. How's that?
There you go, my friend.
Even if just with your kids, that's mastery work.
Yeah, I mean that's huge, because I mean my dad, I it was a different generation, obviously. My dad is a boomer, different generation. I'm Gen Xer. My kids are whatever the hell they are now. I don't even know what their generation is, but it was just a different world. Like back then, the men kind of were stoic, kept their feelings to themselves.
Yeah.
My generation opened up a little more. Now I see that whole stoic thing, that just doesn't get you anywhere.
Right.
So I want to have those honest conversations with my kids. I've already had, and because of the language barrier, the culture barrier, because my family's from Colombia. Um, so my parents were immigrants here, working as hard as they could, multiple jobs. So they didn't have time really to sit down and have conversations. We
Right.
went on family trips. They showed us love. They hugged us, kissed us. They did everything parents did, but they were trying to survive.
Yeah.
And now I'm a different generation, the first in my family to go to college, white collar, able to telework, completely different from their experience. So now I can learn these kind of things. I can learn from people, they were just too busy to survive.
Yeah.
but I can learn from people like you and others and share that wisdom with my kids. I've already had more conversations like that with my kids than my dad ever had with me,
Yeah.
because his mindset was just kind of survival, make sure everything's covered for my family, living paycheck to paycheck, whatever it may be. That's a form of love for me. But
Right.
now what I pass down to my kids is what I've learned. So
And that
I'm
gives me hope.
lucky.
And that gives me hope.
Yeah. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to be cognizant of that and be intentional about what I share with them.
Yeah.
Joe, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share? Anything that I might have missed? Anything that you're up to these days? Anything you want to share with this audience?
Yeah, you know, the Weston network, where we work with organizations, and with our leadership program, we have a management program. We do the different workshops and things like that. I have 2 upcoming respectful confrontation workshops, one in the Netherlands in December and one in New York City in January. And you can get that information on our website, joeweston.com. I do executive coaching and personal coaching as well. So if there's any interest in that, you know, please get in touch just to discuss. And you know, and I'm trying to think if there's yeah, and if you're interested in the books, please read them. I always say that these particular books are great for the holidays. It's
Oh
great
yeah. Oh yeah.
for your family. So
Yep.
holiday time, buy them in bulk, give them to all your family members at
you got
Thanksgiving.
you got like a week and a half or whatever, maybe 2 weeks till Thanksgiving. So you can get that reading in. But Joe's book is Mastering Respectful Confrontation, a guide to personal freedom and empowered collaborative engagement. Timely conversation that we're having on this book, a book that he put out so long ago, but still relevant. Absolutely. Joe, thank you for your time. This
Thank
is
you,
awesome.
John. Thank you.
If there's anything that I might have missed in this conversation with Joe, we're limited on time. I could drag him down some rabbit holes and ask more questions just based on these keywords that he keeps dropping. Just let me know, and I'll reach out to him, see what kind of insights I can pick his brain on. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.